Howdy partners, welcome back to the Video Cowboy. Now what would a cowboy be without his horse? Today I thought we'd talk about some of the great horses that graced your TV screens. Why, we had Hopalong Cassidy, he rode Topper. We had Gene Autry, he rode Champion. We had the Lone Ranger riding Silver. We had Tonto on Scout. And of course, Roy Rogers rode Trigger and Dale Evans rode Buttermilk. Let's start out with the Gene Autry horse called Champion. Champion was a sorrel with a flaxen tail and a flaxen mane and was a very, very smart horse. Could do all kinds of tricks and was in all the movies. But bad thing happened. Champion died when he was just 17 years old. So they had to find another horse for Gene Autry. Had to be smart and had to look like Champion. And being a sorrel with a flaxen tail and mane, it was difficult to find all of those things in one horse. So they found another horse and they actually had to bleach its tail and bleach its mane, so they'd come up with a horse that looked like Champion. Roy Rogers, he was on Trigger, and I'll get to him in just a moment, but let's talk a little bit about Silver. Silver was not necessarily a smart horse. He didn't do a lot of tricks. If you watch all the episodes, you never see Silver doing much with the Lone Ranger. He could untie a rope now and again. And there's one episode where Silver rescues the Lone Ranger from quicksand. Yeah.
Steady, Silver! Back, Silver. Pull, boy! Silver, back! Back, Silver. Back, Silver! Pull! Back! Silver, back!
Clayton Moore, who played the Lone Ranger, used to say that he was the only one who could get Silver to rear up on his hind legs. But if you watch the opening of each show, you'll see the Lone Ranger ride Silver up to the top of a hill where there is a strange rock formation, and he rears up. But right before Silver rears up, there's an edit. In early episodes, they covered that edit with a close-up shot of the Lone Ranger. But after a while, they just gave up, and you'll see the edit. Here, we'll show it to you.
A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo Silver. The Lone Ranger.
Did you see it? We'll run it one more time for you while I tell you that Clayton Moore used to tell the story that it was so difficult to get Silver to rear up, and he was the only one that could do it. He'd get $50 from the producers every time he got Silver to rear up on his hind legs. Let's move on to Roy Rogers, and he rode Trigger. And Trigger was billed as the smartest horse in Hollywood. And he might have been the smartest horse in Hollywood. Trigger could do over 100 stunts and tricks. Such a big ham that sometimes he'd be performing, and before he'd finish the trick, if the audience would start applauding, Trigger would stop and take a bow. Interesting story about how Trigger and Roy Rogers came together. Roy Rogers genuinely loved this horse called Trigger.
Not when you have a horse like Trigger. He was one of the greatest horses that ever walked, and I really appreciate him. He did all of my TV series and all of the pictures I made for theater. And he was just flawless. And I couldn't when I lost him in 1965. He was 33 years old. Oh. And we made our pic. He was 4 when I made my first picture, and I was 26. So we kind of grew up together, and I spent all those years. And he was just, I can't say enough for him. He was just a heaven for horses. That's where Trigger is.
Although he wasn't born Trigger, he was born to a stable near San Diego that was owned by a guy named Roy Cloud. And because he was a Palomino, he was named Golden Cloud. Well, they sold him to stables that provided the horses for the Hollywood studios. And when Roy Rogers became a movie star, they brought over 6 horses for him to try out. Well, once he rode Trigger, it was all over. He didn't even try any of the other horses. So, how did he get from Golden Cloud to Trigger? Well, in a movie, Smiley Burnette was starring as Roy Rogers' sidekick, and he was watching Trigger work, and Roy used to say Trigger could turn on a dime and give you 9 cents change, and Smiley Burnette said that horse is as quick as a trigger. And that's how Golden Cloud became Trigger. Like many movie stars in Hollywood, they changed their name when they went into the movies. Trigger many times was billed above Roy Rogers, and even in the TV series, Trigger's given credit before Dale Evans is given credit.
The Roy Rogers Show, starring Roy Rogers, King of the Cowboys, Trigger, his Golden Palomino, and Dale Evans, Queen of the West.
Let's move on to Buttermilk. Buttermilk was written by Dale Evans. Now, Buttermilk has an interesting story too. Also born in a stables that was well south of Los Angeles, and Buttermilk was a rescue horse. You've heard of a rescue dog? Well, it was the same situation. The individuals who owned Buttermilk first named him Soda, and they really couldn't handle him. You see, Buttermilk was a purebred quarter horse and really liked to run. They couldn't do much with him. They sold him to a farmer. The farmer couldn't do much with him, and Buttermilk was on his way to the glue factory when Dale Evans and Roy Rogers found him. They bought Buttermilk, and they were driving back to their ranch. And on the way back, Dale Evans looked up into the sky. Now, we've told you before that Dale Evans started out as a nightclub singer, and one of her favorite songs was the Hoagie Carmichael tune, Old Buttermilk Sky. And as she looked up into the sky, she saw a cloud formation that looked like a horse. And she said, that's the name of this horse, Buttermilk. So that's the story on your great TV Western horses. So until next time, hasta la vista vaqueros, and I'll be seeing you, Wranglers. Let's move on now to Trigger. And well, what? What'd you want? You didn't like me talking about Trigger? Whose horse?
That's Liz's horse.
Yes, it is. Liz brought her over here for me to use for a minute while we